I'm talking to them about their work and how they each use humor in their very different ways to get their point across.
Tishani Doshi. The very first time I met Tishani was 7 years ago, and they were shooting a film at home, and I came back from the market or something, and this amazing woman stepped out of the bushes. And that was Tishani. She was there acting in a film, and at that stage we had a chat, and she was already a poet, but not a published one then, so she was a poet and a dancer. In those 7 years, she has written a prize-winning collection of poetry, as you heard, and this book called The Pleasure Seekers. Hugely interesting book. It's about 4 generations of an Asian family, one of whom, the protagonist, marries a white girl. Now, you will think you're on familiar territory here, but actually you're not, because a fair amount of it is seen through the eyes of the white girl. Now, I think that is unusual, because there are lots and lots of books coming out of this intermarriage thing, but this particular angle of it I found incredibly interesting. Also, there is something else. In this book, there is a subtext that keeps running through about the nature of love, the nature of loneliness, the nature of space, you know, when somebody goes away and you're left with that empty space. So, you know, all those questions run very cleverly on what on the surface might be a very conventional saga of Asian family life. Over to you, Tishani.
Okay, I just want to clarify that I'm not like, you're elevating me to having another career as an actress, which I don't. And I had a free ticket to just come and say 2 lines in a movie, thankfully, which never got made. So, you know, I won't be haunted by that decision. But luckily, my love affair with Sri Lanka has continued, and I've been returning over the 7 years. This book has taken about the same amount of time, or maybe more, to write. My mother is from a small village in North Wales, and my father is from a small village in Gujarat. And they decided to live in the South Indian city of Madras, and that's my home. And I think the reason why I wrote it is because nobody ever told many stories in my family, and I long to understand where I've come from and where I'm going, basic questions that we all ask. And because I wasn't getting the stories, I just made them up. It starts with a kind of seed of truth, and then in the process of writing fiction, it gets, I think the truth gets transformed into something far more interesting. I'll just give you a quick, it's a family, the Patel-Jones family, and the main sort of protagonists are Babu and Shan. Babu is the young Gujarati boy who goes off. He's the first person in his family to go on a plane, and he goes to London to study, and he falls in love with a Welsh girl, and her name is Shan. And you know, there's a lot of Bollywood melodrama which really happened and which I use in the book, where he's sort of, you know, called back home under false pretext, mother is ill, blah, blah, blah. He comes home, passport is taken away, and he's forbidden to, you know, continue the thing. And this is India in 1968. And so they have, they have a thriving relationship, and they have 2 daughters, Mayuri and Bean. Every night, after the sighting of the ghost on Stirling Road, Bean stayed up listening for the sickly scraping sound of ghosts signaling their entrance into the human world. But all she could hear were cats mating on the wall of the Punjab Women's Association. To Bean, they sounded like an orchestra of babies dying, keening and wailing with horrific intensity, equal in revulsion only to her best friend Mehnaz scratching her nails down the blackboard in class. There were other sounds too, rustlings and slitherings in the corners of the bedroom, making it impossible for her to sleep. When her eyelids finally succumbed to exhaustion, she fell into a sleep so deep and troubled that inevitably, at some point in the night, her legs parted gently for a warm stream of wee to pass between her pajama legs. When Bean slept, even the most benign things took on a malevolent nature. Her toys, who were so gentle and unmoving during the day, threw off their sheets and threatened to poke her eyes out with sticks. Bean, quivering in her non-existent boots, spent most of her nights edging around her sheets, looking for a dry patch to sleep in. And only when she was on the very brink of despair did she rise up in a brief spurt of courage and make for her parents' door, launching herself squarely between them in bed. Babo would put on the lights and say, "See, there's nothing to be afraid of. Try to dream of beautiful things." But Bean knew that ghosts could hide from grown-ups. They could fold themselves in half and slide into a chest of drawers or casually slip into the thin space between the wall and the bookshelf, ka-chink, ka-chink, ka-chink. Or they could shimmy through the window grills and hide in the flame of the forest tree until there was darkness in the house again. Really, it was no use. Once you knew that you lived in a house of ghosts, once you could see and hear them plain as day, there was nothing to do but live in a state of constant torment until they came to get you. And if the ghost didn't get you, then the Buchi man would. It was Mayuri who told Bean about the Buchi man. Mayuri told her these things and then dreamed of fairies and Ferris wheels. She woke like a perfect child in crisp white sheets with sugar at the corner of her lips, while Bean woke up in a cold patch of wee, the soggy evidence of shame between her legs.
Was this a story you felt you had to write?
I think it was a story I felt I could write. Like I said, coming from the very poetic sort of engagement into the fiction world, it was very, very difficult. And also when you are dealing with things that are close to your heart, your family, and you know, it's a bit tricky. But I did feel that there was something very special about this story because, at least in the Indian context, and I do live in India, we are always exploring the movement west. And I think I wanted to consider the reverse immigration story. I wanted to consider what it might have been for a foreigner to come into India in the late 60s and not come into a very sort of, you know, Anglophile, happening sort of family in Calcutta. You know, my mother married into a conservative Gujarati Jain family. She lived in a joint family for 8 years, and she learnt how to cook and how to wear saris and how to, you know, and she's from a one street village in North Wales, and then she comes to India.
So you're going from one extreme to the other. So it's a bit of a balancing act to be able to hold
it's four,
both
and
together.
then it's Madras and London as
yes,
well.
The other thing that you do, which I'm very pleased with, is that you resist the temptation to exoticize the book.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have, as you say, palaces and maharajas and, you know, flying elephants or whatever.
Yeah.
So to get back to this thing, this metaphysical idea, that's the other part of it, part of the book. Was that conscious? Did you see it coming out as you were writing the book?
Well, you know, I mean, I think it's called The Pleasure Seekers, and a lot of people, like my friends, when I said I'm writing, and they were like, wow, that sounds very sexy. Is it like, you know, and it was actually, it is a sensual book. I think it is there in the language and in the subject matter, but it was also exploring the idea very philosophically of what is pleasure. And I was thinking of, particularly within the Jain context, which is what my father's family is, it's a very, it's a religion that's sort of exploring purity, and it's quite extreme. And then I found it quite funny that the Welsh side had quite similar, because my mother comes, you know, her father was a quarry miner, and they were sort of Calvinist and quite also joyless in a way. And I thought how funny that these two people from these very strict religious backgrounds, you know, totally became, you know, just abandoned it and made their own life, which was really in a way seeking out something that was something selfish, and to say it's, you know, you have the one life, so why are you thinking about the afterlife? You know, the sort of sin and guilt and all of that. So I wanted the characters in my book to be pleasure seekers in a sense that they were trying to find what it is they loved and keep that in the center of their life, you know.
Just one quick one. Which of them is you?
They're all me. They're all me. I think I've liberally sprinkled myself into each of my characters.
Tishani, thank you very much indeed. Okay, if Tishani's story is about 4 generations of an Indian/Welsh family, Pauline Melville's story that we're going to deal with here, it's called Eating Air, could quite comfortably be described as the history of 4 generations of terrorists. You have lots and lots of retired terrorists in there. That's what actually I found very interesting, because where do terrorists go when they retire? But I want to begin by quoting something that she has written at the start. It's by Jean Genet. I am drawn to people in revolt because I myself have the need to call the whole of society into question. It's a very complex novel. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. I just want to say, first of all, that I know that there are issues about writers coming here to partake in this festival, and that some people have boycotted it. I chose not to, first of all, because I don't know enough about the internal situation here to take one of those self-righteous decisions. Also, because I've heard about this festival, that it can open up a real arena where there is freedom of speech and we can discuss and talk about certain issues. I'm originally from Guyana in South America, and I now live in London. As a writer, I have the general principle that all governments lie, that they all say everything is fine when it isn't. But we had a particularly repressive regime at one point, many years ago now in Guyana, with one of those socialist presidents who suddenly elected himself president for life and started to sign his name in purple ink like an emperor. And during that period, there was one broadcaster and journalist whose name was Wordsworth McAndrew. You know, in the South America and the Caribbean, we often give people high-sounding names to give them a good start in life. So, in fact, I renamed him Shakespeare McNabb in my story. Everybody in the country knew, or suspected anyway, that some minister very high up, a particular minister in the government, had poisoned his own wife. And so I wrote a story about this because the unfortunate journalist, broadcaster, had to run away very fast into exile. The Comrade Vice President will see you shortly. The secretary did not raise her eyes as she spoke. Shakespeare McNabb wondered why he had been summoned. For a personal interview. It couldn't be a trivial matter. No, it was bound to be something of more weight. Perhaps the Vice President was looking for someone to write his official biography. That would be a more appropriate reason for the summons. Shakespeare worried over how he would deal with the widespread rumor that the Vice President had been responsible for the death of his own wife by poison at a state banquet after she had threatened to reveal certain delicate facts about his financial acquisitions during the current term of government. One moment, apparently, she had been toasting the Republic, and the next she was slumped face down in a silver dish of curried shrimps. Shakespeare frowned. The Comrade Vice President will see you now. The secretary was holding the door open. Shakespeare stood in the center of the room, a deferential smile firmly in place on his impish features. The smile was not returned by the Vice President, a heavily built black man whose overpowering sullenness held the gravitational density of an imploding star. He remained behind the desk and stared at Shakespeare. Behind his head on the wall, a formal portrait of the president himself, with pursed mouth and coptic eyes, smirked down at Shakespeare. The Vice President rose to his feet and came round from behind the desk. Despite his weight, his hips swiveled freely, like those of a spoilt schoolgirl. He came unhesitatingly forward and delivered a resounding slap to the left side of Shakespeare's face. Be more careful what stories you broadcast in future, Comrade McNabb. That's all. Good morning. Green with fright, Shakespeare McNabb left the office. In his grandmother's kitchen, Shakespeare strutted from window to the table, laughing and boasting as he related in full detail the success of his ruse. "So, what do you think, Grandmama? I clever? Your grandson clever? I am now personal advisor to Comrade Vice President Hogg," he crowed. She stirred some casrip into the pepper pot. "Leave the country," she said.
Where were you on the 13th of May, 1968?
I was in London, but a lot of friends of mine were on a boat coming over from France with a big banner that said "England Next." You might not know that there was a huge near revolution in France in May 68. And a lot of British people had thought that with any luck it would be infectious.
So, am I to understand from this that pretty much everyone in those times had kind of revolutionary fervor in them?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say everybody, because look what happened, nothing. But I think certainly on the radical left, there were people who felt themselves to be revolutionaries and were hoping that they could undermine capitalism in some way, which they certainly didn't do, as it spread everywhere like the plague.
I know in my time at Oxford in the 70s, the only revolutionary thing we did was to deny Margaret Thatcher her doctorate.
Yes, but interestingly, to go on, because of course there were groups, the Red Brigades in Italy, the Baader-Meinhof in Germany, the Angry Brigade in England, who had gone underground and were actually becoming too detached and more separate from, I think, the mass of the people. But later on, in fact, a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to meet Nelson Mandela. He had come over to England to unveil a plaque to his old comrade, Joe Slovo, who had been leader of the South African Communist Party and had lived in London. And Mandela came over to unveil the plaque on his house. And it was incredibly moving. There were just about 100 of us that had been invited into the street, which was sort of sealed off. And when the car drew up and this frail figure, grey-haired figure, got out, everybody filled up with tears. It was to see this extraordinary man. And he walked up the steps outside the house where the plaque was to be unveiled. And the first thing he said was, "I am proud to have been called a terrorist, and an armed one at that." And that is really what started me writing the book.
It's a curious book and very, very complex one, because you've got loads and loads of different layers in there, and there are lots of questions in there that remain unanswered, I feel, on purpose. I just want to quote a little bit, which is kind of, it's beautifully written, where Pauline says, "Terrorists go to the movies. Of course they do. Terrorism is only a part-time occupation. Terrorists live most of their life outside balaclavas." Moving on, there are other characters in this book. My own particular favorites are Donnie, who is totally anarchic and a very attractive character, and Hetty, who is nothing short of, what is the word? Psychopathic is the word I'm looking for. A lovely American girl who is totally psychopathic.
But in fact, that character, Donnie, and Ella, the Surinamese character, really I was basing that on the Bacchae by Euripides. I mean, you don't have to know that to enjoy the book. But in fact, Dionysus was the raving god. He was the god of extremes. And I wanted to somehow embody him. And of course, he was followed by I can't pronounce this word, Maenads or something, who were dancers and who had ecstatic dancing. And he tried to destroy any women who were too involved in domesticity.
Extremely fine novel. Look out for it in the shops if you see it. Okay, now we move on to the third writer on this panel, Andrei Kurkov, and this is the book that I have read, but there are many more. How many have you written, Andrei?
Well, I published 17 novels in Russian, and at the moment 6 are translated into English, and the next one is coming out in July.
Okay, and they've been translated into how many languages?
33 languages.
33 languages. So, okay, this is a huge bestseller, and it's almost the antithesis of the other two books I have here. It's a very slim book, it's very sparse, it's very, very concentrated, but I loved it because it's quite gloomy, it's dark, it's hard-edged.
I'll just say a few words. What is this
Yes.
book about? I mean, the main character, Victor, is unemployed journalist, and he is dumped by his girlfriend because he is hopeless, melancholic, and with no money. He feels lonely, and he finds out that the Kyiv Zoo, which doesn't have money to feed the animals, gives small animals away to anybody who can feed them. So he goes there and picks up the last penguin, named Misha, without knowing that actually this penguin is depressed and has a heart problem. And they start living together in a small flat, and life is becoming more comfortable, and actually he's even offered a very strange employment by one of the newspapers to write obituaries about still living VIPs in advance in case they die. And actually he is writing them and the texts are not published because the heroes are not dying. So he complains about it to one of his friends, small mafiosi, and next evening the first obituary is ready.
A penguin. Where on earth did you think of this idea of a penguin from?
Well, you know, I mean, I have only 3 novels with no animals.
Oh.
So, I mean, 14 novels have at least 1 animal per novel. And I mean, and this penguin actually appeared because of 2 reasons. One reason is because there is a joke, excellent joke about a policeman and a penguin.
Yes, yeah, which is repeated in the
Yes,
front there. Yeah.
and the other reason is that the penguins are collective animals. I mean, they have collective instinct, and nature programmed them to do the same things generation after generation. And in this sense, they are very Soviet. I mean, they look like Soviet people. So I thought actually, you can imagine that, I mean, the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's like a collapse of group of penguins, which used to be whole, and then each... Thank you.
Are you stuck with this penguin for the rest of your life?
Well, you will laugh, but I mean, now, yes.
I thought so.
I mean, after this book, I had to write a sequel because I was accused in Germany of cruelty to animals. So I had to write a second novel with a happy end for the penguin. And then when I was on a tour in Germany for the, I don't know, for 40th or 50th time, I was asked to visit the zoo of Halle, and I was asked to adopt a blind penguin, Hedwig. So I had then to spend money collecting money with the newspaper Das Bild for the treatment of this penguin.
Would you like to tell us a joke about the penguin?
A police boss is driving his car in Galle, and suddenly notices a policeman walking with a penguin, and he sort of is puzzled, the boss, and he stops the car and he asks, "What are you doing with this penguin? Take it immediately to the zoo." And the policeman says, "Yes, I'll do it, thank you." And the boss of the police leaves, and then in 2 hours' time he sees the same couple in the other part of the town. And so he's very angry. He said, didn't I tell you to take him to the zoo? And the surgeon says, "We were already in the zoo, we were in the circus, and now we are going to the movies."
Pauline, you were a stand-up comic at one stage of your life, weren't you?
Yes. And I'd worked in the theatre a lot, and suddenly stand-up comedy became a way that you could respond very quickly to public events without waiting for a playwright to write and rehearse and everything, that something could happen and you could go on stage and talk about it straight away. I mean, it's a very... I mean, I didn't want to do it as a career, but I did get caught up with a whole lot of people who started to do it. I love comedy. I think it's the most wonderful thing. I mean, I love what you were reading. And
Okay, I'm going to ask all of you this question. Do you think of yourself consciously as humorous writers when you write?
I don't really think of myself as a comic writer, but I nearly always have a strand of satire. Eating Air is quite serious, and a lot of my writing is quite lyrical and quite poetic. But I do like comedy. If you come from somewhere like Guyana in South America, and I think it's probably the same for Andre, there are certain societies where you don't really even need an imagination because the reality is so mad.
That is true.
I totally agree with it. Yeah.
If I could give you a very quick example, I was just recently going back to Guyana and I had to overnight in Barbados because you can't fly directly to Guyana. And I stayed in a hotel and, just for the night before going to the airport. And I checked in and they said, you're in room 75. So I said, thank you, and I took the key. And I got halfway to the room and the key was 57. So I went back and said, I'm sorry, you've given me the wrong key. And the receptionist whispered and said, no, we do that. We give all the people the keys back to front so that a burglar can't get into the room. Who needs imagination,
Oh, it's a very good solution. I didn't see anything wrong with that. Andre, what about you? You are a gift.
Well, I never considered myself a humorous writer. I love black comedies, but I think actually whatever I write is, I would say, is written by an optimist. Because I was always trying to stay an optimist, and actually I lived through different times. And when the times were very dark, I invented my own theory of black optimism. And I was a black optimist, which means that it is somebody who knows that everything will be all right, but he will not live until this moment.
That's very good. It's a very economical book, written with great economy and sparseness. Is that requisite for humor?
Not necessarily. Actually, I had been writing before very heavy novels, with very long sentences, etc. And at some point I decided that probably I should be more kind to my readers. And the problem is that actually when I write, I listen to the music. So actually, my heavy novels were written while listening to Mahler or Schoenberg. And then I changed the music into jazz, and I decided to have different rhythm and to write with short sentences. And this was the second novel written in this style.
Okay, next question. Do people take exception to your humor?
No, I don't know. Nobody ever has to mine.
No Guyanese dictators sending you letters?
I don't think they can read.
Tishani, Tishani, I think we better stop laughing there. Remember, you're on camera. Tishani, at times you're totally merciless about Indian returnees and their ways, their methods of dealing with life in India once they've come back, etc. Do you get irate letters from NI? What are they called, NRIs?
No, I haven't received. Well, I've received some weird letters, but no letters from irate people.
And Andre, has anybody come up and asked you to write your obituary? But you haven't had any visits from the mafia or anything for portraying them?
You will be actually probably surprised to know that mafia reads more than the politicians, and mafia has more respect for the arts. And once actually when I was in Petersburg, I met a friend of mine who is a rock singer, and he was very upset. It was the first crisis, 98, not this one. And I said, what is wrong? And he said, because of this crisis, all our mafia bosses are moving now to Hungary and Poland, and they don't give any more sponsors money to produce CDs. No, I told already that when I was trying to sell my books on the street, first I was approached by protection racket mafia, but they allowed me to sell books since I am an author. And they said that they will protect me free of charge if I have troubles.
I think there's a common thread running through all your books, and that is one of anarchy. Pauline, in your case, the book is overtly about anarchists, and it reminded me of G.K. Chesterton's books at the turn of the century, which were always full of bomb-throwing anarchists. So you have overtly got anarchy in your book, and Tishani, in your case, you have kind of this huge panoply of characters, and they do become quite anarchic and quite mad at times. And Andre, your book, there's nothing more to be said about it. It is anarchy also. Is that kind of strain of wildness also necessary for humor, do you think? That kind of strain of anarchy?
Not necessarily, actually. I think you can find lots of humor also in stable society. But I mean, the anarchy produces its own sort of, I would say, manner of behavior and attitudes and values which are different and which are also funny.
I mean, Pauline, in your case, certainly you deal with incredibly serious subjects in there, but yet it is hugely funny, you know, as you go through it. Is that, do you find that kind of unsettling, that contradiction?
I don't think that's a contradiction. I mean, I'm not comparing myself with him, but Dostoevsky is hugely serious and hilarious often. You know, I think there doesn't have to be a contradiction to be one or the other. You can actually sort of mingle both. And I think what André says also is true, that humour is everywhere. It's a matter of your perspective and how you look at life. You know, you can look at it in one way or another, and nearly everything can be funny. You know, although that's a bit dangerous. But.
And on that note, thank you very much to my
And that's all for this week. Next week, we have the woman who gave rise to the most talked about TV series of the last 20 years, and she's none other than Candice Bushnell of Sex and the City.